we're just going to kind of talk about investment basics because I thought this came at a perfect time because we were out in San Diego at that marketing conference. And I found it really interesting that, as you know, I hadn't been to this conference before. And so I didn't really know what to expect. But as we made our way around to, it was actually really large. But as we made our way around to the different vendor booths, you know, they ask, so what is it that you do? And Tina had mentioned marketing and I mentioned, you know, financial planning and investment management. And 9 times out of 10, what did they ask, Tina?
Oh, what's a good thing? Where should I put my money?
Yeah, it was always like, what's a good or a hot stock pick? Or we even went to one table mainly because they had candy bars. They had some really cool candy bars. And so we went over to that table and it kind of got our attention. And this guy there had like these commemorative or replica Bitcoins and stuff. And he was like, well, I bet you don't know what this is. And it was like, I was getting schooled and I was like, no, big, strong man, tell me what it is, you know? And it was just so ridiculous. I was like, yes, I know what this is. And, but one thing that stood out was that every person we talked to was so kind of centered around performance or return on investment. And didn't matter if it fit this particular investment fit into their mix, their portfolio mix and what they were wanting to do. It was solely what's going to make me the most, what's going to be the you know, most I can make on it, the highest return, you know, everything else to the side in the way, but what is going to get me the most? And, you know, I kind of blame this on the finance industry. We're bad about this. You turn on the TV, you see, you know, reports on S&P, what it's doing, the, you know, Dow Jones, and I get, I don't know how many emails a day that, you know, invest in this fund or that fund, and then of course the Nigerian Prince one, you know, that's a good investment too. But we have all of these different things that are we're being force fed with it. And I don't even know if I'd call it force fed because we're gobbling it up. I mean, every other article is on Bitcoin and you can't turn on YouTube or Facebook. I constantly get Bitcoin things on there or crypto stuff on there. But we gobble it up because we live in a society of more. Like if one's good, two's better, right? And so we're constantly chasing that next thing that's going to excite us or make us happy. And in behavioral science, we call this the hedonic treadmill. You know, we're constantly chasing that next thing. I can prove it very easily. Like show of hands, and we can see on the panel, show of hands, how many of us are still living the same standard of living we were in our mid-20s? Not this chick. I mean, you get a better house, you get a better ride, you get better, you know, face regimens, you know, you get better things. You can afford it. You've gotten a raise, you get adapted to this. And while it takes that next more to get us excited. Terrible if we have to go backwards, even though we were happy at a lower stage before, we don't want to go backwards. It makes us very, very upset now. So we're constantly chasing these these performance ratings. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret here. It's terrible. Why are we there was a book written that was doing a meta-analysis of all of these different studies on performance and these really highly skilled highly skilled portfolio managers. And the study went a little bit like this: 5%, only 5% regularly beat the market. And it's even worse for day traders. You would think, you know, like if you do things more often, it gets better, right? You lift more weights, you get stronger, you read more books, you get smarter, you trade more on your portfolio, you earn less. And we do that mainly because it's an emotional thing. We're not really looking at just the raw data and the facts and what we need to, and setting up those parameters and only acting whenever it's, you know, a change within those parameters. And only 1 in 360 day traders get it right. Isn't that scary? So we're putting all of our money towards, this thing that's like, okay, 95% of the time it's wrong. Let's put it all on that. And so we're chasing that when we actually need to kind of take a step back. This book, in case you're wondering if you want to read it, it was by Brian Portnoy. Is it Portnoy or Portnoy? It's Portnoy. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Portnoy. They were saying Portnoy, so I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, but it's called Investor's Paradox: The Power of Simplicity in a World of Overwhelming Choice. And they were saying, don't focus all on performance. We need to take a step back and look at why we're actually investing. I mean, we're totally peeling the banana from the wrong end. We're coming up with this, let's invest in these things without looking at why we're investing. What's the root of why we're investing? What are we trying to accomplish? And oftentimes, and I kind of mentioned this to Tina, oftentimes a lot of people don't have externally held investments. They have their 401k. They don't have a big taxable, a taxable account at a brokerage firm. They don't have, a Roth or a traditional IRA held outside. They're putting everything that they can towards that 401k. And we often get, when they're employed, you may get something like a shotgun allocation. They give you this packet and they're like, here, go ahead and make this choice, and we need it back by 5 o'clock today. You don't have time to review all of these investments. And even with the 401k, trying to review them all, there's usually on average, there's only about 25 choices in a 401k. Let's limit that to say even 10, because a lot of those are target date funds. So even 10, what do you think happens? Say, I've heard of this diversification thing, I'll just spread it 10% on each one, right? Or they do the Goldilocks approach. There'll be, it's like, we don't want something too aggressive. We don't want something too conservative. So these 4 in the middle, we'll just throw 25% at those. And then we leave it there. And so we're still, even though we are making a choice to invest, we're still not doing it the right way, because you may have, Bob, who's 65, and Johnny, who's 25. If they're both using that same Goldilocks strategy, which may be in their minds, it may work, it's a good choice. But is that really what's good for them? Is that going to accomplish what they need? Because it doesn't look at time horizon. It doesn't look at risk capacity, risk tolerance. By the way, capacity and tolerance are 2 different things, and we'll look at that in a moment. But it also doesn't look at the longevity. How long are they expected to live? What if Bob, his family, the guys on his family or his side of the family end up dying before, full life expectancy? Are we investing at something that is so specific to that person? And the answer is no, we're not. And so what ends up happening, well, and we've tried to make it better. We've come out with, as investment managers, we've come out with like target date funds, right? So we know that maybe Bob invests in something that's called like a 2025, if he's going to be retiring in a couple of years, and it has a lot less equities in there than maybe one that Johnny, who's 25, is going to invest in, which may have more equities, and it kind of shifts along the way for you. It's better. It's definitely a better choice, but it's not something personalized to you. It still doesn't look at necessarily the tolerance, the capacity, the longevity, and any other investments you may have. So we're going to look at maybe just 5 short little steps that you can do that kind of gets you on track with that and really has you honing in on what's best for your particular situation. Now, it's important to start. I think we've looked at this to start with the actual job that you're trying to do and not the tool that you're trying to use, right? So we need to start with what we're actually trying to accomplish. And there was this study done. I found this a fascinating study. There was a study done with an incident in the Amsterdam airport. And what happened was they were having a terrible time keeping the men's bathrooms clean. Sorry, guys, they did not mention the women's in here. So y'all get to carry the baton on this one. And the problem centered around aim. We'll just leave it at that. And so they were trying to come up with these different ways to fix this issue. And they said, well, maybe we can hire attendants to stay in the bathrooms kind of around the clock. Maybe that would discourage the wrongful aim. And so they said, okay, well, that's going to require us hiring these people. We're going to have to train them. We're going to have to, offer benefits. How many are we going to need? What if someone turns their back? Is this person going to do it? How many are we going to need in the bathroom at any one time? And someone said, well, maybe instead we'll just boost the times that we clean it. We'll have someone maybe pull a Buc-ee's, right? Have someone in there cleaning constantly. And of course, then we're going to have multiple people in there cleaning and monitoring. And it's going to cost more in cleaning supplies. It's going to cost more in manpower. And I'm going to think that maybe it was a woman that came up with this idea, because we deal with this with children a lot too. We said, we're not really solving the problem though, right? We're putting a Band-Aid on it. We're finding ways to fix what the problem is causing. We're not fixing the problem. And if we're starting at the root of it, the real problem is the aim. And if we can fix that, we wouldn't have to do all of this. So what they ended up doing was they gave people something to aim at. They painted a small fly in the urinals, and it decreased the mess by 90%. So we're starting with the tools. We're not starting with the job. We're not solving the initial problem. And the initial problem when we look at investments is why we're investing. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And if you say to be able to live throughout retirement and not have to worry about money, that's a boring answer. You get no points for that. Everyone wants that. I've never had someone come in and say, you know what, I don't care if I have enough to live through retirement. I mean, I'll just get another job if I run out of money. No, that's not what they say. So that goes without question. We want enough to retire on, but what is it that we want to do while we're in retirement? So the first thing we're going to look at are the values. What makes you happy? What brings you peace? What makes you feel satisfied and fulfilled? And that's what we're going to focus on. And some people say, oh, it's travel. I want to do this. I want to do gardening. No, what is it that you're wanting to do? And when we get to the root of that, some people may say, like, spend more time with family, right? I want to spend more time with family. That doesn't cost us anything. I know it's like time is money if we look at it from a business aspect, but it doesn't cost us anything out of pocket to give of our time. And we can look at that for volunteering. We can look at that, spending time with family or doing some volunteer work with neighbors or bettering the community. And so that doesn't cost us any money. And if that's something that can fulfill us, then maybe that's what we can focus on. Now, if we say our family lives, maybe I have one kid that lives in Florida and one that lives in Arizona, to be able to spend time with family doing that, then I'm going to have to travel. So that's going to be an associated cost. What am I going to do when we get there? Are we going to just hang out at the house? Or when I'm in Florida, are we going to Disneyland or World? Is it Disney World or Land?
Disney World is in Florida.
Okay. So we're going to go to Disney World. And so maybe I can begin to associate certain costs with that. Maybe I'm going to go at Christmas time. Maybe I'm going to go on an off season when the tickets are cheaper. Maybe I'm going to drive. And if I drive, I can maybe, visit some landmarks along the way. Maybe I want to do one every other year. And so we can begin to start associating financial price tags with those specific goals. And then we can look at, I like to call it the deli counter approach. Who's been to the deli and ordered lunch meat? Me. I did yesterday. What do they say after you say, give me a pound of turkey, shaved super thin? Say, what else? Oh. Right? You want some cheese? Okay, yeah. What else? And so they keep doing this and kind of drilling down in till you really, you're going to have to dig deep and figure it out, what it is that is going to satisfy you. And then just keep going until you just bottom out. You're like, I can't think of anything else. I've looked at everything. And
so your goal is really to get to that sandwich of whatever your big value is, like, your retirement, in retirement, you're going to spend time with family, and that means traveling. So it may, that might be your cheese is traveling, and your meat might be you want an RV, something like that.
Yeah, because your performance, when you're looking at performance, really, it's not, we don't want to focus on investment performance. We want to focus on life performance. And that's good, Tina, write that one down. We don't want to focus on the investment performance when we look at that. We want to really look at what it is that we're wanting to accomplish. And when we focus on that, the investments can fall into place with that, because each investment that we have in a portfolio should fulfill some obligation, something that we're, it needs to have a specific job. Why are we, and you should be able to answer that. Maybe not if you're not yourself picking those. If you have an advisor like Gary and I, then we may be picking those for you based on what you have recommended. You've told us that you want to do. So we're picking and choosing those for you. But if you're doing this on your own, if you're total, investor DIY, then that's something that you're like, this specific investment is going to be towards this goal. This one is for growth. This one is safety of, when there's a market downturn. And then that's how we can diversify a portfolio. And so you're actually looking at what it is that you're wanting to accomplish, and then how much those goals are actually going to cost you. Because in the long run, when we're laying on our deathbed, we're not going to care about what the performance was in a portfolio. We're not going to care if we had, Facebook or Amazon or one of the other things as an investment, or Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever. If we're not going to care about all of that, we're going to care about the experiences. So why not focus on those to make sure that we're accomplishing those, and use the investments as a tool to get there? And so I want everyone just to really kind of help focus and pick 5 things that you really want to do, 5 things, and see if you can't do more. And then let that kind of trickle down, kind of do subsets. So we want to spend time with family. Okay, I want to travel. I want to go to the beach. We have some clients that say, instead of because they have kids on different sides of the US, and they say, what we like to do on the holidays, twice a year, we'll rent a big Airbnb, and then they bring the kids in, and they can have a vacation there together. Instead of mom and dad going to 2 different places, they bring the kids in, and they have a nice holiday together. And that's the gift that they give them. I'm sure, the grandkids will get a little something too, but, little gifts, but it's more, that's the gift of time, and the gift of being able to get together. But see what really interests you, whether it's, volunteering. Drill down in and see what volunteer organizations you want to do. Is it something that you want to deal with animals? I think I told you, and I don't know if you can't see Panda or Pandora here. She's our foster, which we were a foster fail. We adopted. And so, but she's around here, down here. And that was something that I hadn't really been involved with, was fostering or realizing the need for. I knew that there was a need for that, but it was like, oh, they're going to chew up my furniture, and they're going to pee on the floor. And that, so it was something that I really wasn't focused on, the joy that it can bring. And she has brought us quite a bit of joy, some headaches, but quite a bit of joy. I think last month when we did this, she was just constant, right? She was barking and hiding her. Yeah, it was fun. We're kind of past that stage now, so it's a little bit better. But once you figure out what these things that are really going to be fulfilling to you, then you can associate a price tag with that. And that's your financial need that needs to be met. And so we look at the financial needs, and then we subtract out. And this is where you can add in, basic expenses. And if you do, and the new car that you're going to have to get, and how often you're going to be getting that. But we're looking at, what are your financial needs? How much does it cost for, food, clothing, shelter, medication, insurance, anything that you need like that? Then we can add in some of these goals, whether it be travel or some other type of financial price tag associated with these values that you have. And we're going to look at all those up, and then subtract out any fixed income we have, Social Security, pensions, retirements, anything like that you're going to have. And then that dollar amount that you come up with, that's the gap there, that's what you're investing for. That's really what you're investing for, because that's what you want to fulfill. And so then we can say, okay, now we know that we're going to need this percentage of return to accomplish that. And that's where you end up building out that portfolio and say, okay, for this 6% return, a 60-40 portfolio mix is going to be adequate. And I mean, we never know what's going to be for sure, but we can say this is going to be what we feel is adequate. We can monitor that annually to make sure it's still on track, and then go from there. And then from there, we can say, okay, 60-40, mix. Then we can look at the individual securities that we're going to put in them from there.
So just to clarify, once you figure out your needs and everything, and what, how much you're going to need to spend, then that's when you go back, you look at what you have and where you're starting. So you look at that chunk of money that you have and chunk of money that you're going to have invested, and then you figure out the percentage of that you need to make on that money in the future. Is that right?
Yeah, it's going to take some time value of money calculations for sure. And there's a lot of financial calculators online that you can use. But if you know that I need my investments that are, let's just say $200,000, and I need to have it spit out this percent, like this dollar amount, say $20,000, what rate of return am I going to need to make that happen and keep it there for 30 years? A nice, easy way to do this, I mean, it's just like the quickest way, is you can say, use the 4% rule. And we can look at that and say, okay, if I know that I have, let's use that $200,000, since I've already mentioned that, I take 4% of it. We know that $200,000 will provide me $8,000 on average, $8,000 a year for 30 years. We know that keeping up with inflation, worst case scenario, about $8,000. Of course, that can change, but that's just a nice rule of thumb, that you take whatever your investments are and you take 4% of those. Those should keep up with inflation and last you right about 30 years, which is almost through retirement. Should be through retirement. Some argue that you should be looking more at 3.8%. Some say you can look at a little bit higher. Tell me when you're going to die and I'll tell you how much it can be. That's where it gets down to, and what the markets are going to do. But on average, if you look at the 4% rule as a rule of thumb, then that can give you a really quick, easy way of saying, I have this chunk of money in the account based on a balanced portfolio mix. I can take $8,000 a year from that.
Okay, so when we're looking at the way that we're going to invest then to get that percentage, what other things do we have to look at to make sure we're kind of going into the right things?
Well, I think when you determine, let's say that you come up and you determine 6%, that's pretty good, because on average, stock market, all percent, you're 100% invested, usually returns on average 10%, right? If we're looking at a balanced portfolio, about 7% per year on average. Some years is more, some years is less, but on average. And so if we're needing, say, 6% or 5% from that, then obviously we're kind of on track already, right? If we're going to need 8 or 9% or worse, I mean, if we're going to need 15%, then we need to make some choices. Either we're going to have to get very aggressive and increase our risk tolerance, or we're going to have to maybe adjust our financial needs. So maybe we dial down the travel a little bit. We find, maybe we live a little bit cheaper, or we die earlier. That works too. But some mixture of that there. And if your risk tolerance is on, right on average, that's good. If you have a 6% need or required rate of return and you're extremely conservative, that may not be good either. It may be normal for some people, but if you're very conservative, then that doesn't make sense for you either. So we're still going to have to figure out some balance there. Now, I mentioned a difference between risk tolerance and risk capacity. And let me give you an example about that. I do look at crypto just to kind of keep up with things. And I'm in this one crypto Facebook group, and this guy in there, I don't want to say he doesn't know what he's talking about, but he's like, I mean, he's totally on board with like, I'm going to mortgage the house and invest all of that cash. And then I'm going to do a 401k loan against it. And I'm going to invest. And I'm like, oh my God, so he has a very, very high risk tolerance. I mean, like exploded risk tolerance. He doesn't necessarily have the risk capacity for such a high tolerance. And what I mean by that is earlier this year, he loaned against his Bitcoin and some of the other cryptos that he had. You can actually do that where you kind of pledge it and then you can loan up to about, I think it's about 50% or so, and you pay yourself a moderate interest rate. And so he did the loan to himself to start up a new business. And so this way the interest would be tax-free. So he's basically giving himself a tax-free loan. And so he used this money that he took as the loan, and he purchased vehicles in the Dallas area to rent through. I think the app is called like Turo or something like that. And where it's like an Airbnb for your car. People can rent your car, you give them a code and they can get in. And so he was doing really well because, a lot of the rental car companies closed their doors. And so people couldn't get rental cars. So he was doing rather well. Well, in May, when the market in crypto went down, I think it was 40, almost, I think it was maybe even more than that, because just based off what mine did, it was a little over 50%. And that caused a margin call on his account. And he had to come up with this money to buy more crypto and buy it at a cheaper rate. And because it was down, all the coins were down. And so he was going to have to come up with this money to put back in. And he didn't have any more money because he'd spent all of his money investing in other things. And so while his risk tolerance was very high, his capacity couldn't be backed up. You can have a very high risk tolerance and not the capacity to do that. And so I think that looking at both of those is important, because, you may be able to go, all in on black, but if you don't have enough to back it up, then, if you do lose that, then there's a problem. And so when we look at these types of things, especially like if we're looking at the example with 65-year-old Bob and 25-year-old Johnny, Bob may have, the pension income. He may have, military retirement, Social Security, civil service retirement, and his 401k, he's like, I'm never going to touch this. So he may be able to have, he's like, I'm leaving this to my grandkids. I don't care what it makes. I'll do my RMDs if I get to that age. But other than that, this is all going to the grandkids. Then he may be able to, have a much higher risk tolerance level on that particular investment. And he has the capacity for it because he has other money that he's not needing to live and eat off of this 401k money. So he has the capacity to get, a little bit higher risk or take a little bit more risk on that. Whereas Johnny doesn't necessarily, he doesn't have this money or some other pensions or whatever. So he may not be able to do that. Now he would have time horizon on his side because he has a much longer time frame to be able to earn those dollars and make those contributions. But he certainly doesn't have the capacity at this point to back it up. And so we have to look, and both of them are equally important. And I think that when we do risk tolerance questionnaires, I've seen some that are like 5 questions. How can you gauge something off 5 questions? It's like whatever mood you're in that day or whatever the market's doing that particular day. And that kind of has, we kind of anchor to some of those things, because we can get pretty ballsy whenever the market's doing fantastic. We're like, sure, put it all on red. But whenever it's doing really bad, we're like, maybe we should, do this instead. And so that tolerance can change. It's not supposed to, like in our core, very, very much. It doesn't deviate more than a few points, but it can scare us. What the outside influences can scare us. And that's why taking a thorough psychometric exam that doesn't just look at, how you're going to deal with performance, but what the gut feeling is going to make you do, and that emotional side. Because a lot of the investment stuff, we buy and sell things based on emotion and based on familiarity. I may, I've heard of this before. It's done great. Amazon stock, it's done pretty well. Walmart, it's done pretty good too. But I may base my opinion on something that I'm just emotionally attached to, whereas it's not necessarily the best choice. So we have to pull the emotional side. And in fact, that's, I mentioned earlier on that this book, Investor's Paradox, said, as investment advisors, 5% get it right. 95% of the time, they get it wrong. And that's consecutive. I mean, and they can't even determine really if it's the skill behind it that they're getting it right, or if it's just kind of like market conditions that actually make them win 1 or 2 years. Usually by year 3, they're not consecutive as much. But we know that the biggest value that advisors bring isn't their investment choices. It's that we can make investment choices that are geared to specific outcomes. This is the end goal. And usually there are about 4 or 5 really life-altering decisions, financial decisions that you'll make in your life that can totally derail your plans. And it's the goals of the responsibility of the advisor that can hold your hand and talk you off the ledge during those specific things. We've only had, I think, one person, and I've been with Gary for about 16 years. There's only been one person that got really nervous when we had a market, downturn, and they said, I want to get out for now. I'll get back in when things get better. They never got back in. They locked in the loss, one in all the years. And they kicked themselves for doing it. They're like, if I just stayed in, but they were so skittish about it. They couldn't handle any tolerance, any risk at all. They were like, I want it in cash. And if I could, I would take it out of my IRA and bury it in the backyard. I mean, it was that extreme. And there are only certain things that can, you can gauge and measure certain things, but how someone's going to react when a market falls like that, you can't predict everything. So that's something we pull the emotional parts out of it. And really, and if you can do that, if you can just say, this is what makes sense, this is how I'm going to invest, set up some, automated thing, dollar cost averages in, and then leave it. That's a way to do it too, if you're going to DIY it. And that's what a lot of the 401ks, you say, this is how I'm going to invest. And specifically, if you're not in a target date fund, you say, this is how I want it done. And then they'll do that. Any new contributions will put in at that specific percentage and then go from there. But it's really finding what it is that you're going to need, what rate of return, what mix that rate of return needs, and then focus on what actual investments that you're going to need to put in there to create that.
Okay.
So make your head swim a little.
A little bit, a little extra information, but I think I've got the basic stuff down.
I was talking with at another conference I was at right before we went to San Diego. I was in Scottsdale, and they had a behavioral psychologist there. His name's Dr. Daniel Crosby. Love his podcast. If you want a good podcast to listen to that kind of really goes more of the behavioral science aspect of it, specifically behavioral finance, his podcast is called Standard Deviations. Really good one to listen to. And it gives us a lot of insight of why we do the things that we do when it comes to money. And I got to talk with him shortly. And one of the things that he had mentioned is like, investing and building a portfolio is really simple. It's just not necessarily easy. And so putting the pieces together to build the portfolio is easy. I mean, making a stock pick is really easy. It's the stuff before that that is so much more complicated, and that's making the decision. And mainly because we're saying, okay, when I retire, this is what I want to do. And when we think about retirement, we think we're closer to death, right? And so we don't want to think about that. So we can't think about retirement and what we're going to do in retirement, because that makes us realize that we're going to die. And so it's like, when you think of it that way, people get freaked out by that. And so if we kind of put it as more of, and this isn't even just in retirement necessarily. What if it's pre-retirement? What if it's, I want to retire earlier? What can I do to make it to where I can retire earlier? That's a goal as well. And so we
or like you were saying yesterday, what if what I really want to do, what I really value is doing a different job. And so what do I need to do now to accomplish doing that job?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you know that you are good at woodworking, or if you're good at some specific hobby of yours, and you know that, man, I'm going to make a go at this, but I need to get to this point. Where is that point that I can retire from my regular job and have enough money to then quit that and take up my hobby and supplement as a part-time income? Where, at what point can I move that needle? And where is it going to be successful?
So it's not necessarily, you don't always have to be thinking, oh, I just got to figure out what I'm going to do before I die. But, little segue here, that's what we're talking about next month. We're going to be talking all about estate planning. So you can get that stuff settled and get the estate plan stuff done. So then you can enjoy your life while you have it right now.
Yeah. And I think that's important, because I mean, like I said, in the end, and I think each of us have probably known someone that was affected by COVID. I lost my uncle in October, and it wasn't COVID related, but he was already in poor health. And I blame it on like not being able to get out as much. And, he was just stuck in his house by himself a lot. But I blame it kind of on that a little bit too. And, so I think each of us have been affected by that. And in the end, what is it that we really, really want to do? And, because when we're on our deathbed, it's not going to be like, oh, I wish I would have gotten that extra 0.5% on my, on my portfolio in, 2021. No, it's going to be, I led a good life, and I was able to accomplish all of these things. I will be remembered by so many people because of the things that I did. And they're not going to give a hill of beans what your performance rate was on your portfolio, and neither will you. And so if we take the focus out of take ourselves off of that hedonic treadmill and take the emotional aspect out of it when we look at investing, and we focus instead on not the more, but enough to get us to where we want to go. If we get more, fine. Maybe it's been a good investment year. Maybe we didn't need as much in any particular year, and we could have kept that in the account to save. But if we have a pin that we can, or if we have a point where we can pin it and say, this is how much is enough, anything extra is gravy, then that's going to allow me to do all of these things that I find so important. We're going to totally Marie Kondo, what brings you happiness, what brings you values, and what fulfills you. That's what life's about. And that's what we need to invest for, not for a higher performance return or return on our investments, but instead, at the top up here, deliver happiness. We want to make sure that we're investing for life and not for performance. And so I think that's what's important, is to really, look at it in that aspect. And instead of starting at the wrong end, we start with, what is it that we're actually trying to do?
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's nice to have the things together. Mm-hmm. So, before we close this up, does anybody have any specific questions about finding your values and defining your goals for your investments?
And I think our mindful money really kind of pulls this in, because we need to really be mindful about what we are doing with our money to make our money work. Our money's a tool. It needs to be working for us. And we can definitely make it work in our benefit if we give it a job. I mean, a hammer is not really useful if it's just sitting there. It's very useful if we're hammering something into the wall. So let's give it a job and make it work for our benefit.
Go ahead, Walter. Did you have something?
I just appreciate these so much.
Oh, you're so welcome.